Welcome back to CS 107. This is week 12. We'll be focusing on building a quiz app using the knowledge of lists that we've worked on the last couple weeks. So in this video, it's mainly the overview for the quiz app. There's going to be a separate video under the homework module that will focus on the new code.org lessons. Corny joke of the day or week: what do you get from a pampered cow? Spoiled milk. Alrighty. As always, office hours, Rothman's available from 5 to 7 on Thursdays. You can get Ayla and Natalia Monday, Wednesday, 4 to 5. Really appreciate everyone using Piazza. It's not the best user interface, but it is a pretty smooth way for us to all communicate quickly. This class, I hope that these last couple weeks have been a little smoother, but we've all the things going on in the world. Obviously, not always a smooth ride, but I got to say, really appreciate you guys' the constant effort. Just the quality of work overall is just very high. It's not a whole lot different from, in my opinion, from what would happen in person. So great work, keeping it up, asking questions, coming to office hours, and we're in the last month of the class. So let's finish strong. Alrighty, talking about the quiz app that you're going to be building this week. Last week you started working with this idea of parallel lists, and so it was when you had an image and a label that had the name of the image and they moved in concert. And this time we're going to go to 3 different lists. So we used 2 lists last week. This time we're going to go to 3 different lists. You'll be initializing an answer. So it's a quiz app. The app is about CS innovators from the past, and so you'll be making 3 lists. One is an answer list, and it'll have the answers to the questions. You'll have a question list. So the questions that I have are a little long. So instead of having you type it directly, you can use the handout, and I would just copy the question and then paste it right into the text block, and then you'll have an image list that will move in concert. So 3 different lists that you're working with in the quiz app. A new thing that I think is worthwhile, it's definitely good coding practice. I don't know that it's 1,000% necessary for getting your quiz app to work correctly, but it's good coding practice to think about when a screen opens, what do you want, what should pop up. So in this case, you're going to want to make sure the question label and the index label are, or rather the question label and the index label are set to whatever the index is initializing to. So of course using an index label. So using a new block, you may not have used it much. It's when this screen opens, it counts as an event. Something you guys have, just a quick review, the idea of a next, or using an index to move through a list. So if you had a next button, that might change the index value, and thusly it would change all the position of that you're at in your list. So you might be at the first position in all 3 lists, and then you can move to the second, third position, and so on. Yes, using an index variable. So something that we have sort of glossed over, but I think is worth mentioning, is that there's 2 ways to increment variables in Thunkable, and the one that we've been using is just the change app, whatever the variable is, so change app score by 1, for example. And that's that's a built-in block, and it's a shortcut from what's actually going on behind the scenes. And so just so you know, on the left there's a different way you can do it, which is the more traditional way. You might call that the iterator pattern, which is it's a very common thing in coding and variables in general, and that is to set a new whatever the variable is, you're setting a new value equal to the old value plus or minus however many. So both of these will work. We've been using the change, sort of that change block, because it's simpler. But the example on the left is actually the more sort of pure computer science way to do it. We haven't really pushed it, but you should know that that's something that's happening behind the scenes. You guys saw this last week, which is how to select an item from a list. So you start off with this block. It's in list, and then it has a generic list block in there. It says get at number 1, and we know that if we were just using 1, 2, 3, or 4, then we would have to create a new event every time. So instead, we can make things simpler by and more reusable. So we're plugging in, instead of this generic list, the one that says A and B, we're plugging in the exact list that we want, and then we can plug the index in where it says get number. We can just set it to the index, and that way we don't have to use as many events. We don't have to do as much coding. It's much simpler and efficient if once we get comfortable using the index, the idea of an index variable. All right, one other one, and I think you guys saw this last week, but you can of course set an image component. You can set the picture to as a reference to an item in a list as well. And then that list is referencing, because we already have the images uploaded, because I've given you a template, but it is able to interface like that. So if you have the correct name of the image in the list, it will be able to, the program will be able to reference wherever you have stored your images. Okay, so the bug, or like I think the challenge concept from last week is, what do you do when you get to the end of a list? And so we kind of worked this through, is that you're going to use some sort of a conditional, and it's going to check for the end of the list. And we're going to use this length of list block, because if we just looked at a list and say, okay, well, there's only 3 items in this list, we could just put 3. But if we changed the length of the list from 3 to 5 to 50 or whatever, then we would need to go back and find that specific place in the code. So using something like a length of list block, when you get into 110, or when you take more computer science, that would be what you would call a built-in method. So the length of block here is actually, you will find that in most languages, something very similar to that will calculate the length of a list or some sort of data type, and as something you can use frequently. So that's a very common thing, not just in Thunkable here, but in any language. And then by checking the condition to see if the index is equal to the length of the list, you can then ask the program to make some decisions. So there's a new concept that's going to allow us to check whether answers are right or wrong, is you can check values against a list. So you'll be using a text input component, and you're going to check to see when an event happens. So if you click the answer button, you can check to see if the input in the text input box is equal to the value of the answer, or rather whatever the answer is at a specific index. From there, again, it's a conditional where you can have the program make a decision whether it should say correct or nope. There's one additional piece. Again, this is a little more computer sciencey than we normally get, but you got to, so a common bug in any type of like quiz, or anytime someone's entering like a password, for example, or a username, is this element, is that this is somewhere where computers can be very specific as to, or the programming gets very specific as to what's capitalized and what's not, in a way that you can kind of work through that, or make it easier for the user, and also obviously easier for the program to understand, is instead of saying you need to capitalize, having a label that says you need to capitalize the first levels, or everything in uppercase, or everything in lowercase, you can automatically set things to uppercase or lowercase. And very specifically, that's so you can check the values against each other. So if your answer list has it in lowercase, but someone types in an answer with uppercase, that's going to come back incorrect. So we have to resolve that. There's another sort of built-in method that we can use, which will set the string, or whatever is written in, to uppercase or lowercase. In this case, I've set it up as lowercase. The block says uppercase, but you should switch it to lowercase, and then you pop it into your event here, where, so with the answer button is clicked, you're checking first. The first thing it's going to do is take whatever's in the text input. It's going to make it all lowercase. And since we wrote our answer list in lowercase, and if you didn't do that, and you're referencing back the answer list is written in lowercase on purpose in the example, because it's a much more realistic and simple way of checking to see if the answer that the user input is equal to the actual list that you're looking into. So you want to make sure to use that uppercase lowercase block. Number of challenges this week. One is you're going to be challenged to keep score, and this time I'm going to challenge you to do correct and wrong answers. So you'll need 2 different variables. You'll need a correct variable and a wrong variable, and then 2 different labels. Reset procedure, pretty straightforward. You'll be resetting probably the index and the variables for correct and wrong, and then the labels associated. I'm going to ask you to put in a text-to-speech block, which is actually really simple, and so that will it'll just speak out whether if the answer is correct or answer is incorrect. It'll say something related to that. I want you to try to add a random question button, so that references back to the basic coding that you did in Magic 8 Ball. So add a button where instead of the questions just going 1, 2, and 3, it'll bring up a random question. There's some extra credit challenges. You're not expected to do this, but if you want some extra points or want to add some things, you can add some intro and end screens. So we have the CS Innovators quiz as an intro screen, and it's got an image and a button to start the quiz, and then we have an end screen at the end of the quiz that'll tell you the final, or how many you got correct, how many you get wrong, whether you want to play again or return to the intro screen. Last extra credit challenge, this is a bit harder, and this is adding a timer. What the timer is going to do is you can have a a defined amount of time to answer a question or a defined amount of time to take the quiz overall. So you'll add a timer component. You should probably have a timer variable and a timer label so that the user knows how much time they have left. And then so you'll set a timer countdown, and at the end of the countdown you may switch questions, or you could just have an overall countdown that checks for the entire quiz. And if you did this, I believe it's also an extra credit challenge in the Tourist app. The programming is really similar to, so in the Tourist app there was a timer that like automatically changed the picture and the label, and so it's the same concept of programming if you made it that far. Actually, I should show you what probably should have done this in the beginning, but this is what a finished app would look like. So I've got my CS Innovators quiz, and obviously it doesn't look quite as good in the browser, but easier to pull up. So we have the first question. We know the answer is Grace Hopper, and I used the lowercase button. So even if I put it up, some uppercase letters, it should be right. So I'm going to answer it.
Correct.
It speaks the answer. It gives me the answer label, and I actually set it to change automatically rather than having to use the next button. But I mean, that was just messing around with it on my end. So then we got another one, and so we know this movie is Hidden Figures. I'm going to answer it.
Correct.
And the variable changes, and this should automatically change after a couple seconds. You don't have to do that. It's something I did. So we know the answer is Alan Turing, but let me just put a wrong answer in.
No, try again.
Okay, well, I guess I could try again here. So let's see. Now we know it's Alan Turing, and I'm going to answer it.
Correct.
Alrighty, and because it's the last question in the list, it knew to change to the end game button. All right, so that's what the app will look like to some extent. And then, so what else is going on here? There's a separate video that's going to talk you through the lesson for this week. So last week watch the other video for the overview of lesson 5. And so just a reminder, this week doing the CS Innovators quiz app, and then the week after we're actually going to do a custom quiz app. So you'll be able to set it up with your own questions and images and answers. And then we'll get into the homework in another video. It's lesson 5, puzzles 1 through 10, and as always, a survey. Good luck and have a great week.